Okay, thank you guys for waiting. I apologize. There was a little issue with the live stream that I needed to correct. So thank you. Welcome back. Nice to see all of you guys. I'm going to share with you the 5 precepts. This is referred to as a householder's guide to daily practice. These are 5 impactful decisions that you could make either wisely or unwisely that are going to lead to either wholesome results or unwholesome results. What I'm going to do is walk you through these 5 precepts, helping you to understand them with the original words of the Buddha, and then I'm going to apply them to day-to-day life and certain ways that you can apply them in situations that you're going to find yourself in from time to time. And then I'll help you to be able to navigate this and be able to see this large gray area, because oftentimes with the 5 precepts, people are interested in looking at them as black and white, but there's not black and white here. There's a large gray area that you're going to need to learn how to navigate based on the guidance that the Buddha is teaching you. Everything that you will learn in the teachings of the Buddha in one way or another are coming back to this natural law of Kamma, of cause and effect, or action and result. What we were talking about just a little bit ago, I just kind of mentioned it just a little bit. These 5 precepts, where sometimes people like to look at them as rules or commandments, I don't look at them that way. I don't think of them that way. Instead, what the Buddha is doing is he's exposing you to the natural law of Kamma, of cause and effect, or action and result, helping you to see various decisions that you could make, that if you make them wisely, it'll produce wholesome results. And if you make them unwisely, it'll produce unwholesome results. And it's up to you to cultivate that wisdom and be able to see the wisdom in these particular teachings. So I'm going to walk you through each one of these and helping you to see what the Buddha is describing. So this first one here, I'll read the words of the Buddha and then I'll show you how to apply it in your day-to-day life. He says, abandoning the taking of life, refraining from taking life, without stick or sword, diligent, compassionate, trembling for the welfare of all living beings. So remember, the ultimate goal here is to purify the mind of these certain pollutions that are in the mind. And what the Buddha is doing is guiding you in what it took for him to be able to get to that peaceful and joyful mental state and how he purified his mind. And one of the things that he did is he cultivated this loving kindness or this compassion for all beings. And that's what he's describing here in the 5 precepts, that it's important to cultivate this loving kindness or compassion for all beings. That if we were out in the world killing other beings, whether it be human or animals, there needs to be a certain amount of anger and hatred in the mind in order to do that. And if you're out there causing harm and killing and injuring other beings, then this harm is going to come back to you. And we can learn this from the Buddha, that this is a wise choice that we could make, and then we can reflect on it and see the truth for ourselves in situations where other people are maybe out there killing or doing damaging things like that to living beings. You can see that the harm comes back to them. People beat them up, people try to kill them, people arrest them and put them in jail. Then they get into these fights and arguments and bitterness and hostility. If you're out there on the street killing living beings, it's going to cause harm to those living beings. And now this harm is going to come back to you. So what the Buddha is teaching you here is to live compassionately for all living beings, so that way you can work on eliminating any kind of anger, hatred, or ill will that's in the mind. So if a mosquito is coming to land on you and you just kind of smash it like that, that might be what we're used to. There's a certain amount of anger there to be able to do that, right? And you would like to just kind of brush it off or blow it off with your breath. This will help you to live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, right? Where you don't have to go around and kill things. You can learn to see the spider in your house and you can just relocate it outside rather than killing it, perhaps. And this will help you to develop this loving kindness and compassion. But when you're studying the teachings of the Buddha, you should investigate and examine what he's teaching you. So when you see a teaching like this, one of the first things you might think is, what's a living being? That's something that you're going to need to figure out. If you're going to live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, the first thing you might ask yourself is, what is a living being? Well, the Buddha gives a definition of a living being in his teachings. He talks about something called the 5 aggregates, also referred to as the 5 elements or the 5 collections. The 5 aggregates are 5 things that make a living being a living being. And as I teach it to you, you can sit here and you can reflect and you can determine whether this is the truth or not, because you know that you are a living being. And when I describe these 5 things, you should be able to see that you indeed have these 5 things. And so does every other living being. So the Buddha describes a living being as having physical form, that it's going to have physical form, that there's going to be feelings, There's going to be perceptions. What a perception is a view or opinion about the world, that you look out at the world in a certain way. Then there's going to be what's called volitional formations. A volitional formation is a choice or a decision that a living being is going to have free will, that they're going to be able to make choices and decisions. And then the fifth aggregate is called a consciousness or the mind. So form, feeling, perceptions, volitional formations, and consciousness. And if you look at your own life, you can see that yes, you have all five of these things. These five aggregates or five collections or five elements. And you can see that a cat, a squirrel, an ant, a spider, a snake, all of these things have the five aggregates. And this is how you determine what a living being is. But you don't just stop there. When you're investigating the teachings of the Buddha and you're examining them, you also look at other things that aren't a living being, that you know isn't a living being. And this will help you to be sure that this definition that the Buddha taught 2,500 years ago is still applying today too, that you can arise the wisdom to see that yes, it describes what a living being is, and that non-living beings or things that aren't living beings, those don't have the five aggregates. So you can take something like this chair, because we know that this chair is not a living being. And we can apply these five aggregates and see, does this chair have the five aggregates? So you ask yourself, does this chair have physical form? Yes or no? Yes, it has physical form, right? Does this chair have feelings? No, doesn't have feelings, right? Does it have perceptions? Does it have views and opinions about the world? Doesn't have those, does it? Does it have choices and decisions, volitional formations? Can it choose to pick itself up and walk down the street and put itself back down? No, can't do that, right? It doesn't have volitional formations. It doesn't have a consciousness or a mind. Does it have a consciousness? No, it doesn't have a consciousness, right? So here you can see that the Buddha is describing for you what a living being is, that this chair is not a living being, but this is a living being, and there's other living beings. So when you're looking to develop this compassion for all living beings, then you understand what the Buddha is talking about using the five aggregates. And this is something that you can dive deeper into when you understand more and more the teachings of the Buddha. But in the meantime, if you're looking for kind of a shorthand way to look at this, you can look at something like this, that a living being is going to come from an egg, a sperm, and it's going to have a consciousness. This isn't necessarily true in all situations, but this will help you to at least kind of start moving in the direction of the five aggregates. The Buddha explained it perfectly, the way that he describes it through the five aggregates. But this can kind of be a little bit of a way to help you lean in that direction towards understanding the five aggregates. So you're going to need to ultimately understand the five aggregates as you make your way to enlightenment, but this can be a way to kind of help you along the way. Okay, so a living being is going to have all five of these aggregates. So now when you start to understand what a living being is, and that you would like to live compassionately for these living beings because any harm you cause to them is going to come back to you, then you might start looking at things like this to determine whether or not you would actually participate in these or not. And remember, this isn't black and white. Things like euthanasia of a human or animal, termination of a pregnancy or suicide or assisted suicide, capital punishment or war, or any government-sponsored killings or murder. These are all intentional killings, but whether you choose to participate in these is your choice, right? The Buddha nor me are here to tell you what you should or you shouldn't do, right? These are decisions in life that you need to make for yourself. But these teachings are here to guide you and help you to cultivate wisdom and decide for yourself what it is that you would like to do. And again, these things aren't black and white. So I'm going to take one of these and just kind of help you to see how you might kind of look at this. And maybe I'll even take more than one to be able to help you understand, right? So let's just take one like termination of a pregnancy. Some people think of this as a political thing. I don't think of it as a political discussion. Termination of a pregnancy, it's a medical technology that we have. It's available to us, and it can be used in certain situations where it could potentially be a wise choice. And there are certain situations where it might potentially be an unwise choice. This is where you need to decide and you need to navigate for yourself. I'm not here to tell anybody what they should or shouldn't do with their body. It's up to each individual person's choice of what they would or wouldn't do. In fact, if somebody came to me and asked me for advice whether they should terminate a pregnancy or not, I wouldn't tell them yes, and I wouldn't tell them no. It's up to them to make the decision. I would say, if you do terminate the pregnancy, here's what you'll experience as a result. And if you don't terminate it, here's what you'll experience as a result. And it's up to you to make those decisions. But looking at the termination of a pregnancy and understanding that the Buddha is not teaching black and white here, you can look at a situation where maybe a woman has a fetus inside of her womb, and maybe we know through medical technology that this fetus will never be a viable human being outside the womb. And perhaps by leaving that fetus inside the womb, it's threatening the life of the woman. And maybe in this situation, it would make sense to terminate the pregnancy. And that's living compassionately for all living beings. Because in order to have compassion for all living beings, you need to have compassion for this being first. You need to have compassion and loving kindness for yourself before you can have it for others. So in this situation, if the mother's life is at risk, then perhaps it would be wise to terminate the pregnancy. And that might be what that person chooses to do on her own. That's her choice, right? But then there could be another situation where somebody's regularly experiencing pregnancy, and maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 times, if they continue to get a termination of a pregnancy, it would start affecting the health of that person's body. Maybe they're just making the decision to regularly terminate pregnancies, and now it's starting to affect them in a negative way, because if you have enough terminations of pregnancies, it will actually cause health issues for the woman. So this is where you have to navigate this and look for yourself to determine what will be wise or unwise in any one given situation. And these teachings aren't here to dictate to you what you should or shouldn't do in any given situation. It's to give you wisdom to realize that in different situations, you might need to respond differently in each one of those situations. So for example, say you have termites at your house, and these termites are eating your house. What are you going to do? Are you going to let them just eat the house and then you don't have a shelter to take care of yourself? Well, what we did when this happened at our house, we had termites at our house. We looked on the internet and we looked to see if there was some way to get rid of these termites without killing them. And when we were researching this, we realized, no, there's no way to get rid of these termites without having somebody come eradicate them. So we hired a company to come. They drilled holes around our house and they put this food that had a bit of poison in there, and then they ate that food and they took it back to their nest, and slowly but surely these beings were eradicated. Whereas if we would have let them continue to eat our house, that's not showing compassion for all living beings. Me, my wife, my son, we would have been out of a house. We wouldn't have a place to live because these beings are eating our house. And this is the animal world, is that the animals, they don't have the same level of consciousness as a human being. As a human being, we wouldn't go to somebody's house and eat their house because we know it would be unwise. It would cause harm to those beings. But an animal doesn't have that level of consciousness. It doesn't realize it should go to the woods and it should eat the trees in the woods. That would be a better choice for those beings. But instead, they came to our house and they chose to start eating our house. And now this harm that these beings are causing, now harm is coming to them. This harm is being experienced where they're getting killed. And this was the Kamma. This was the result of their decisions. We didn't choose to go out actively looking to kill these beings. We were choosing to live compassionately for all living beings, and we needed to live compassionately for the beings who we are. So if this harm is coming to us, we needed to eliminate it. It's the same thing as like if you were asleep in your house at night and somebody at 2 a.m. in the morning broke into your house and came in through a window. I guarantee you they're not bringing you chocolate and flowers at 2 a.m. in the morning, right? They're there to do harm to you. So what I would advise a student, that if you can, get out. Just get out of the house. Go call the police, let the police come and deal with that issue. But you might not always be able to do that, right? You might be backed up against the corner. You might look outside and there's a gang of people outside your house, and it would be unwise to go outside the house. And maybe now you're backed up against the corner and this person is coming at you. And you might need to cause harm here in order to live compassionately for this living being who you are, right? Or your family members. But what I would encourage people to do is cause as least amount of harm as possible in this situation. If this person has a stick, get a bigger stick, right? And try to take care of this situation, right? But in certain situations, if you were just to stand there and let this person keep hitting you and beating you up and causing harm, this wouldn't be living compassionately. So these teachings that the Buddha is sharing about here in these 5 precepts, it's not black and white. It's not in every situation do it this way, or in every situation do it that way. That would be permanence. moving to this higher consciousness, which is the enlightened mind, it means that you practice discernment or wise decision making. You're going to need to have wisdom on board in your mind to then, in each situation that you encounter, figure out what would be the wisest way to handle this. And that's why I suggest that if someone broke into your house at 2 a.m. in the morning, if you can, just get out. If they would like to mess up your house, if they'd like to steal something, go for it. Protect your life. Go somewhere else. Call the police. They have the tools and the techniques and the education of how to handle that situation. But you might find yourself backed up into a corner, and that's where, if you do the least amount of harm as possible, that would be best. That would be ideal, right? So you're going to encounter these different situations at different times. Now, remember, this is the natural law of Kamma that we're talking about. We're not talking about rules and commandments. We're talking about you cultivating wisdom to be able to move to this higher consciousness and make wiser decisions. These natural laws of Kamma, it doesn't follow the rules of a government, right? So if a government said to their citizens, hey, we would like you to go over there and fight those people, we're going to make a war in this other country, and we would like you to go kill those people. And when you come back here, we're not going to prosecute you for murder. We're not going to put you in jail for murder. So a government could tell you that, right? And that's a governmental law. That's what human beings are telling you. Hey, go over there and kill those people. We won't arrest you. Okay, but the government laws aren't perfect, right? A human being can't create laws or rules that are going to be perfect. The natural law of Kamma is functioning at all times, whether you're aware of it or not. So if you understand the natural law of Kamma, then you know if you go away to a war, you're very likely to get injured. You're very likely to get killed yourself. You're very likely to have mental challenges. You can get addicted to substances. A lot of times when people are coming back from wars, they end up killing themselves and committing suicide. This is the natural law of Kamma. It's not punishments and rewards. It's not that anybody's dictating that these things are happening. It's not about fault or blame. It's about the results of our decisions. Whereas if we choose to go away to a war, our government can tell us, hey, we're not going to prosecute you for murder. But we can't escape the results of our decisions. We are going to experience those results. So when we choose to go away to war, even though our government has approved it, we're still going to experience the results of being somewhere where we're actively killing living beings. So whether we choose to do that or not, it's our choice. Each individual person needs to make a decision for themselves about what they would like to do or what they wouldn't like to do. And with this natural law in this precept that the Buddha is sharing with you, you can perhaps navigate that better. And understanding that sometimes we use language in the unenlightened state that doesn't really represent true reality. Sometimes we say, I'm going to kill the tree, or I'm going to kill this virus, or I'm going to kill this bacteria I'm going to take this antibiotic and kill this bacteria in my body. So in the unenlightened state, we sometimes use language in ways that is not really representing true reality. So we will say, I'm going to kill this virus or kill this bacteria or kill this tree. But you can't actually kill something that's not a living being. So what we're truly doing when we're taking an antibiotic is we're not killing the bacteria. We're not killing the virus. We're eliminating it from the body. We're not truly killing a tree. We're actually harvesting a tree. We're not killing the broccoli, we're harvesting it. But in the unenlightened state, we tend to use words and we tend to talk about things in the world around us in ways that doesn't represent true reality based on the misunderstanding of the mind. So if you're currently using that kind of language, you might think that you've done something wrong by harvesting an apple or harvesting a tree. You haven't done anything that's necessarily unwise because that's not a living being. And these resources that are on the earth are here to help us to be able to sustain our life and live our life. That's why if you cut down a tree, we've learned over time that if we're going to cut down one tree, we should probably plant 5 or 10 trees. This is probably a wise thing to do so that we can continue to grow trees and have trees in the world. That when we cut down a tree, we're not actually causing harm, and that's why no harm comes to us, because we haven't killed a living being. Or if we have a bacteria in our body, or if there's a virus in our body, and we take a medicine in order to eliminate it, we don't cause any harm to any living being. We actually experience wholesome results because we're not killing the bacteria. We're not killing the virus because it's not a living being. We're just eliminating it from the body. If we were actually causing harm to that virus or to that bacteria, we would experience harm ourselves. So that's what the Buddha is showing you here with this first precept, is this cause and effect or action and result, that by killing a living being, you're going to then experience unwholesome results. But you'll need to pay attention to the various language that you use, that if you're talking about killing a virus or killing a bacteria, you're not actually killing it. You're just eliminating it, because you can't kill something that's not a living being. So I can't kill this chair. I can't kill this microphone. It's not possible because it's not a living being. And just like a bacteria or a virus or a tree is not a living being, I can't kill it because it's not a living being. So moving to this higher consciousness and making wiser decisions, part of that is to understand vocabulary, to understand how we use language perhaps in the unenlightened state that doesn't really represent true reality, and then using vocabulary in a way that does represent true reality. There's things that students sometimes ask me about. It's called a DNR, or do not resuscitate. This might be something that you know about in your country, if your country has this. There's a legal document that you can sign that says that if this body dies, don't use medical technology to bring me back to life. And sometimes students ask me, is that living compassionately for all living beings? Haven't I killed something? And the answer is no. You haven't killed anything in that situation. What you're saying is, I feel comfortable with death, that if this body dies, don't bring me back to life. So if you decide that you have a DNR, or you would like to have a DNR, you're still living compassionately for all living beings, because you haven't intentionally killed any living being. You're just saying that when this body dies, you're comfortable with death and don't use medical technology to bring me back. So if you ever decide to do one of those things, you can feel comfortable that you're still practicing this particular precept. That's not something you have to do, but sometimes students ask me about these kinds of things. And they even ask me about things like defense and protection, which is what I already talked about with somebody breaking into your home at 2 a.m. in the morning. You understand how to potentially approach one of those kinds of situations. And then sometimes students ask me about being vegan or consuming animal products and eating plant-based food supplies. Well, if you look at this, you can see that by eating a plant-based food supply, it actually creates better results for you. Whether you choose to do that or not, it's your choice. Nobody's here to tell you what you should or shouldn't do. But if you can see this cause and effect, or this action and result, you can see nowadays that by eating meat, it actually produces more sickness in your own body. It actually kills a living being by eating meat, and it's causing harm in the world. And we're noticing that our environment and our climate is being affected by these kinds of things. And your own physical health is being affected by this as well. Because when you're eating animal flesh, you're not just eating the flesh, you're eating whatever substances that animal ingested. And what they've done through research is they've taken wild fish out of clean streams in places like America, and they've tested the flesh of the fish to see what substances are in that animal. And they found things like antidepressants and cocaine and other things. They found over 90 different substances in this wild fish that weren't supposed to be there. But because us humans have been putting these chemicals into the water table through flushing them into our toilets and stuff like this, like antidepressants and cocaine and things like this, the groundwater has been polluted. So even wild fish like salmon are absorbing this into their flesh. And when you're eating animal flesh, you're eating those same things. And if you're eating farmed animals, you're also eating things like antibiotics and certain toxins and hormones and things like this. And this will affect the health of your body and the health of your mind. So you might consider at some point to move from a diet where you're eating animals to moving over to a plant-based food supply. But when or if you ever choose to do that, it's your choice, right? So as you learn certain teachings, you might then start reflecting on it. And then as you practice and you start seeing through eating plant-based food supply that the health of the body becomes more healthy, then you'll know the truth for yourself, that you're making a wise decision because you're experiencing better health in the physical body based on individual choices that you're making. But when or if you ever choose to do that, it's a choice for you to make. It's not for me. I'm just sharing with you the cause and effect or action and result, and helping you to be able to see that by you making a wiser choice around food, you'll be able to see different results. Because I used to eat meat at one time too, and I used to get all kinds of difficulties in my stomach, certain food poisoning or diarrhea or things like this. And particularly here in Thailand in the summertime, when the meat is out, when I was eating meat, I would get bacteria in my stomach. And several times during the year, I would have all kinds of difficulties with digestion issues. But since moving over to a plant-based food supply, I don't experience any of those kinds of things whatsoever anymore. I notice more health in the body and more health in the mind too. And this is where you can independently verify these teachings by you choosing, if you like, to move to a plant-based food supply. You'll see the health of the body becomes more healthy. But again, whether you do that or not, it's a choice for you to make. I'm just here to show you the various things that you might consider. So these are all things that you might think about on your journey to enlightenment. You guys have any questions on this precept? No questions? Okay, let me see if we have any questions online. Okay, I'm not seeing. Oh, you have a question, Steve? Sure.
Thank you, David. Just on the consuming animal products thing. So the precept there says, black and white, that we should abandon the taking of life, refraining from taking of life, which would translate, and then having to define what a living being is, which includes animals. Don't you just jump from there to not eating, making a decision to not eat meat? Because if you go online, there's debates and debates about what is a healthy diet, and there are healthier ways to consume animal products and unhealthy. So I guess my question is, isn't it just like the precept is to abandon taking life, therefore you're better off not eating animal products regardless of the...
That would be my suggestion to somebody if they ask me, like, David, what do you think? Should I, move away from animal products? I would let them know my experience in moving to a plant-based food supply, that I noticed significant improvement to the condition of the body and the mind by doing so. But then there's also going to be certain people that are really challenged in doing that. And when or if they ever choose to do that, they're going to need to decide for themselves. So it's something that I did gradually. Once I decided to move, it took me 2 weeks to get off meat, but then I still ate eggs and cheese for a period of time, for about 6 months, and I kind of let the body and the mind kind of adjust to that. And then I moved away from eggs and cheese as well, so I wouldn't be involved in any animal products whatsoever. So each person has to decide, what's the right time for them, or if they're even going to do this. And then once I moved away from that stuff, and I did that for like 3-4 years, I was also donating blood as well, and my B12 dropped, and I started noticing these symptoms, and I needed to go back to eating eggs and cheese for a couple of months to be able to build up my B12 again. So this is where you have to be able to have compassion for this living being and gradually make your way towards improve decisions in your life, and realizing that the body and the mind's going to need time to adjust. And now I take a B12 supplement, which is what I was doing before as well, but also I was donating blood every 3 months, which was contributing to the depletion of my B12. So these are things that you need to kind of look at, and you need to manage and become wise about. You need to gain wisdom about these kinds of things. But also there could be a potential person out there that say they're moving over to a plant-based food supply, and based on certain medical, a little bit of meat in order to move over, right? Because we are the first generation that's kind of moving over to the plant-based food supply in a big way, that our bodies and our minds haven't really adjusted to that. At one time, human beings were plant-based eaters. When we were first came onto the earth, we were plant-based eaters. This is what scientists, researchers, anthropologists tell us. And we don't need to believe those people. We can actually see the truth for ourselves based on our teeth, that our teeth resemble a plant-based eater, where people or beings that eat meat, they have sharp, ripping, tearing teeth. Whereas if you look at our teeth, they resemble what a horse looks like or a cow looks like. They almost look identical to exactly what a horse or a cow looks like. And our teeth have remained looking like a plant-based eater because that's what we do. And our teeth aren't going to just change and evolve in the last 10,000 years or 20,000 years, because at one time we used to eat plants and that's all we ever ate. We started running out of plants because our population became too populous. So we started taking over the hunts of animals. We started being scavengers, and we would run away animals from their hunt, and we would take over and we start eating their meat. But then we became so populous that we needed to learn how to do organized hunting. So we started organizing as a population, and we started hunting and killing animals, and this provided us the food that we needed. But then that wasn't enough either. We started doing farming, and we started manufacturing animals in order to provide us the food that we needed. Well, now people are realizing that this hasn't been going well for us, and it's starting to cause harm to our environment. It's causing harm to our body, and people are moving back to plant-based food supply. And this would be a wise thing for people to do, but because we're the first generation to do this, some people are going to have complications in doing that. And they might need to maintain, 5, 10, 15% of a little bit of animal products in order to maintain their health. And if somebody needs to do that, then that's a choice for them to make. And then maybe in the future, as more and more generations get used to eating plant-based foods again, our bodies can be sufficient on plant-based foods. Because there are some students that I have that they were vegan when they were inside the womb of their mother. They've never actually had an animal product at all. They've never even tasted what a piece of meat tastes like when they were in the womb. And now that they're outside the womb, they might be in their 50s and they've never eaten any meat at all. And they don't need to take any supplements. They don't need to take anything at all, because their body is fully adjusted because it never actually experienced eating meat. So as more and more generations move to a plant-based food supply, humans will be able to get back to the point that we were once, where we could actually sustain ourselves off of just plants. But it's going to take time for us to gradually move in that direction. And each person needs to decide for themselves whether this is the right time for them or whether that's something they would even like to do or not. So that's why for me, I'm just here sharing what would be wise, and then whether someone chooses to practice that or not is up to them and how they choose to integrate it into their life. But in my opinion, it would definitely be wise to move to a plant-based food supply, but realizing that as you're doing that, the body and the mind is going to probably experience some challenges that you're going to need wisdom to work through, which is what I had to do, is taking supplements and gradually moving to eggs and cheese and then coming back to it at one point for a couple of months in order to build up my B12 again. So these are the kind of things that you'll need to learn along the way. Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions online. So let's move to the next precept. This one is, these are the words of the Buddha. He says, abandoning the taking of what is not given, living purely, accepting what is given, awaiting what is given, without stealing. So there's 4 aspects to this, right? Of course, stealing would be unwise. This would be from our own craving, our own desire. So remember, the Buddha is helping you to purify the mind of craving, anger, and ignorance. That first precept is to help you eliminate anger and ill will. This precept is to help you eliminate craving. That if you were to steal from other beings, this is based in your own craving. You're longing, you're yearning, you're wanting something, and you're stealing it from somebody. And when you do that, you're actually causing harm to that individual. And now there's going to be harm that comes to you as a result. So if I stole somebody's car, that person can't go shopping to buy basic supplies to sustain their life. They can't go to work. They maybe can't take their kids to school if they have children. So now I've harmed that individual. And now there's going to be harm that comes to me as a result. So the Buddha is teaching you that it would be unwise to steal. And this is going to help you to eliminate your craving in your mind. But also, you can apply this to ensuring that you don't assume that something can be used, right? If you assume that something could be used, you've taken something without asking, right? So if I was like a college student and I was in a class and I was handing in my paper to the professor, maybe the professor's out of the room and I see a stapler on their desk and I just grab the stapler and I staple my paper, and now the professor walks in and they see that I'm stapling the paper and they're like, "Hey, what are you doing? That's my stapler." Right? Maybe they're attached to their stapler because they're not practicing the teachings necessarily. And now they're attached to their stapler and they're having painful feelings, right? And they're getting angry and frustrated. And now, because of their lack of wisdom, they're attributing those painful feelings to me. They think I'm the one who's causing their painful feelings. And now maybe I get a bad grade on that paper. Or maybe they fail me in the entire course, right? This will be my unwise decision to use this stapler without asking. Where what I could have done is I could have waited for the professor to come back into the room and I could have asked them, "Do you mind if I use your stapler?" And they might have said yes, and they might have said no. And if they said no, okay, I'll go find it somewhere else, right? But if you just use something without asking, this could put you in a situation where someone could be attached to that thing, and now they're going to get angry and frustrated. They're going to attribute those feelings to you, and you're going to encounter difficult situation. So not only is the Buddha helping you to get to this enlightened mental state, but he's helping you to navigate a world of unenlightened beings. That if you were to just go around and use things without asking, then this is going to impact you. So you would like to understand that, hey, someone could be attached to their stapler, and would it be wise for me to just use their stapler? No, it wouldn't be wise. Even though it's something very simple, it's just one little staple, no big deal. You might even see other people using the professor's stapler from time to time. But if you haven't asked, it would be unwise to assume that you could use it. So it would be wiser for you to be able to ask and see if it's something that you could use. And this will protect you against any kind of unwholesome things coming back to you because you've just taken something without asking whether it could be used or not. Notice this part here where the Buddha says, accepting what is given. What he means by accepting what is given is that when somebody's practicing generosity with you and they're offering something to you, it's wise to accept it. Right? Because if you saw somebody handing you something and they were practicing generosity with you, that generosity that they're practicing is enhancing their mind. It's helping them to eliminate craving, desire, attachment. And by you accepting it, you're actually helping them to practice the giving and sharing and get closer and closer to enlightenment. So if you were to reject somebody's offering, if they were practicing generosity with you, you would be shutting them down, right? You're shutting them down and shutting them down and shutting them down. And eventually people are going to stop offering something to you. So if you're in a situation where grandma wants to give you that sweater that you know that you're never going to ever wear ever, and grandma's giving you this sweater, what the Buddha is teaching you is to accept that, right? You accept that sweater. But now that you've accepted that sweater and grandma's mind has had this helpful practice of generosity, you can practice generosity too. Because now that you have this sweater, you know you're not going to ever wear it, you can hand it off to somebody else. And maybe somebody else hands it off to somebody else, and somebody else hands it off to somebody else. But eventually it's going to find somebody and they're going to say, "This is the most beautiful sweater I've ever seen. I'm going to wear this every single day." Because your other option is to put it in the closet and just let it sit there for 20 or 30 years and deteriorate, and nobody ever gets to use this sweater. So if grandma gets angry that you've given the sweater to somebody else, that's because of her cravings, her expectations. Her mind didn't practice pure generosity, where she was giving without any expectation of anything in return. Her expectation was you were going to use the sweater. But if you give it to somebody else, you haven't caused any harm. You've just practiced generosity. Any kind of anger that grandma experiences, that's because of her craving, desire, attachment. So in situations where somebody gives you something, it would be wise to accept it. But remember, this isn't black and white. If somebody offered you cocaine or heroin, are you going to accept it? No, right? You're not interested in accepting that. So this is where you need to have that discernment or wise decision making. You need to move to this higher consciousness where you're looking at what it is that you're experiencing and deciding whether or not you would like to make a decision to accept this thing or not. And in situations where it's something that doesn't cause harm, it would be wise to accept the gift. But in a situation where it's like drugs or heroin or something like this, you're not interested in accepting that. Or if it was a stolen car, car and somebody was offering it to you, it would be unwise to accept that. So this isn't black and white. You need to be able to use discernment and wise decision making. And then this last part where the Buddha talks about awaiting what is given, what he's talking about there is not putting your expectations on somebody. When, like, say you have a life partner who's going on a business trip, if you're like, oh, get me this and get me that and get me this, if you were to put your expectations on that person, then if they get you what you want, you'd be happy. But if they don't get you what you want, you might be sad or frustrated or agitated. So what the Buddha is teaching you is don't put your expectations on people to give you something, but instead just await what is given. Right? This is why you don't see at a Buddhist temple people handing out baskets to be able to put donations into. We just await what is given. If somebody would like to make an offering to us to help us pay for the electric or water or something like that, great, we'll accept your offering. But if somebody's not interested in practicing generosity with us, that's okay too. We're here to help you regardless. We share the teachings without any expectation of anything in return. So in your life, if you practice where you just await what is given rather than expecting somebody to give you something, you'll find that your mind will be peaceful and joyful because it's helping you to eliminate craving. That's what this precept is there for. This precept isn't a rule. It's not a commandment. It's helping you to eliminate your craving in your mind where you're wanting something from somebody. So any questions on this precept? No questions here? Okay. See if we have any questions online. All right, I'm not seeing any here either. So let's go to the next one. This one is often translated as no sexual misconduct, but the Buddha didn't actually teach that. He doesn't teach rules and commandments. He gives you much more illuminating language that's going to be able to help you to understand how to practice and why you're practicing it. And it's all based around harm and not causing harm and practicing harmlessness. So I'm going to read it to you and then I'm going to apply it to things that you're going to see in day-to-day life. Here the Buddha says, abandoning unchastity, abandoning sexual relations with women, men who are protected by their mother, father, and father, brother, sister, or relatives, who are protected by teachings, who have a husband, wife, or partner, whose violation entails a penalty, or even with one who has been garlanded by a man, woman, or partner as a sign of engagement. So here he's helping you to understand how to have sexual contact in a way that doesn't cause harm to other beings. So this part where he's talking about abandoning sexual relations with someone who's protected by their mother, and father, brothers and sisters and relatives, he's talking about ensuring that you don't have sex with minors. If we were to have sex with a 8-year-old child or a 12-year-old child, they're growing and they're developing and they're being nurtured by their family. And having sex is a very impactful thing. And if we were to do that with that child, it would impact them in a very significant way. And the Buddha is teaching us that it would be unwise to be able to do that. But whether you choose to do it or not is your choice, because there are certain countries where governmentally it's legal to have sex with an 8-year-old child. There's places like that in the world. A lot of places it's illegal, where this is where the human laws in the natural law of Kamma matches together, but there are places where it's actually legal. And if you look at those kinds of places, you'll see that their society is having a lot of difficulties in that particular region of the world, that they're having really a lot of difficulties because they don't have elders in their community, that their mind is well developed with a lot of wisdom, that are making wise decisions, because these children are having sex very early in life and they're not able to develop their mind into making wise decisions. So that particular society is really struggling. So you can see that in the world, how this natural law of Kamma is affecting them. And then this sex without consent, this is where the Buddha is saying this is where the Buddha is saying whose violation entails a penalty. This would be like raping somebody or forcibly having sex with somebody. That would be causing harm to an individual. Where the Buddha is saying abandoning unchastity, that's having multiple sexual partners. And here we can see the harm for ourselves. We can directly reflect on this, that if you've ever had sex with multiple people, you're more likely to get sexually transmitted diseases, or you might have a lack of trust, or you might have certain feeling of guilt or shame in certain situations where maybe you're having multiple relationships in a short period of time. You can see that there's the potential for sexually transmitted diseases. This is the harm that we're experiencing as a result of our decisions. Again, whether somebody somebody chooses to do that or not is their choice. But here the Buddha is helping you to be able to see the natural law of Kamma, and then what choices you make is up to you. Sex while living in the home of relatives. What I'm sharing here is that this is something that goes on in a lot of cultures, and this is where a family has accepted the relationship. This would be practicing this precept. Like here in Thailand, if you have a partner, you might become 18, 20, 25 years old. You meet somebody and you go to your parents and you say, hey, mom, dad, I met this person. I'd like to get married. Can we move in to your house for a period of time, start our relationship, and then we're going to save money, and then we're going to go get our own house. And in this situation, if somebody was doing that, the parents have accepted the relationship. They've welcomed the person into their home. And if you're having sex in that situation, you're still practicing this precept. That's not what the Buddha is talking about here with sexual relations with women or men who are protected by their mother, father, brother, sister, or relatives. So this is a family who has accepted the relationship. Here, where it says sex with someone who has previously decided to remain celibate, this is where the Buddha is talking about who are protected by teachings. Right? There's some people who are on this path to enlightenment who have decided to eliminate sexual contact, and they no longer have sex. And this is part of the path to enlightenment. You can actually get to the second stage of enlightenment and still be having a sexual relationship. You can do all the other work on the path to enlightenment and still be having a sexual relationship. And you'll be able to experience a certain amount of peace and joy. But you're still going to have a certain level of agitation and annoyance. Your mind's not going to be enlightened as long as you're having sexual contact, because there's going to be times where you can have sex and you'll feel great about that. And then there'll be other times where you can't, and you'll be agitated, and you'll be annoyed or frustrated. So whether you choose to have sex or not, again, is your choice. You can get all the way to the second stage of enlightenment and still be having sex. And you'll have a very peaceful life in that second stage of enlightenment. And depending on where you are in your life, depending on your age and where you are with your life circumstances, you might still choose to have sex, maybe for the next 10, 20, 30 years, or who knows how long you might be choosing to do that. But at some point, you might decide this peacefulness that you're experiencing with the mind becoming more and more awake is more important to you than this sexual relationship. And now you and your partner might decide to slowly let that go. And if you do, and you've decided to remain celibate and no longer have sex, you'll see more and more peace coming into the mind, because you won't experience that agitation when you can't have sex. But if somebody has decided to not have sex and you were to try to lure that person away from that, the Buddha is saying that would be unwise, because somebody getting to enlightenment is the very best thing that could ever happen for that person, but also people in the community. Because if somebody gets to enlightenment in a particular community, that person can then help other people get to enlightenment. So if we were to try to lure somebody away from their celibacy and trying to have sex with them, this would cause harm to that person, and it would cause harm to many people around who would potentially be able to learn how to get to enlightenment. So here in Thailand, they make it really easy for you that ordained practitioners aren't having sex. So they wear robes, they shave their hair. So it's very easy to see that they're not having sex, and you can choose not to have sex with individuals like that. Or here in Thailand, people who wear white also are choosing not to have sex. I don't wear white because I'm trying to broadcast to people that I don't have sex. That's not why I choose to wear white. Me and my wife no longer have sex. It's something that we chose to eliminate a while back. But I wear white for other reasons, and it's not to broadcast anything like that, but just know that here in Thailand, people who wear all white, they're choosing not to have sex. So if you're going to have sex and you're interested in having sex, find somebody who's interested in that. And that is what the Buddha is guiding you to do, is to choose to not have sex with people who are choosing to remain celibate. Then here where it says sex with multiple people who are already in committed relationships, if you were to have sex with people who are in committed relationships, this is going to cause harm, right? They're in a committed relationship, or you're in a committed relationship. If you go outside your relationship, or they go outside of their relationship, this is where people get beat up and murdered, and they get into arguments. You get sexually transmitted diseases. These are all the unwholesome results that we experience because we're making an unwise choice to have sex with somebody outside of our existing relationship, or lure somebody out of their own relationship. So here you can see the truth for yourself, that the Buddha is teaching something that would be wise. And then you might look at whether or not it would be wise to have sex with someone who's human trafficked, right? If somebody's being forced to have sex and they're doing this for paid services, this would be unwise to do this type of thing, because in those kinds of environments where you go into an environment where you're paying somebody to have sex and they're forced to have sex, you're very likely to get beat up or robbed. You could get murdered. You could get drugged. You could get all kinds of difficulties in these kinds of situations, and sexually transmitted diseases as well. So those are things that you would like to consider and look at. And then also there's these kinds of things to think about in relationship to this precept. We were just talking a little bit about paid services. It would be unwise to have paid sexual services or to be a worker who's working in that kind of situation. Of course, some people are challenged and that's what they have available to them in order to sustain their life. But in that situation, again, it's very likely that you could get beat up, you could get murdered, you could have sexually transmitted diseases. There's all kinds of challenges there. And that's the reason why, is because of the natural law of Kamma. And here I like to point out that there's no harm in same-gender relationships. If you or somebody you know prefers same-gender relationships, notice that the Buddha doesn't talk about same-gender relationships here in this precept. And the reason why is because it doesn't cause any harm. Same-gender relationships were happening during the lifetime of the Buddha too, just like now, because he talks about this kind of thing in his teachings. You can see where he teaches that there's individuals who prefer not to be with males or females depending on their gender. And when he talks about it, he just makes an observation about it. He doesn't teach anything about it. So when he teaches this precept 2,500 years ago, he understands that a man and a female that are choosing to have sex together, they're not causing harm to each other. They're not causing harm to anyone, because they're making a conscious choice to have a loving, loyal, consenting relationship and have a sexual relationship. But the same thing is true about two females or two males that are choosing to have sex. If they're a loyal, loving, consenting couple that's choosing to have sex, they're not causing harm to anybody. So in this situation, that's why you don't see that the Buddha taught that same-gender relationships would be harmful, because they're not harming anyone. And if you understand the universal truth of impermanence that the Buddha taught, then you understand that it's not possible for every man to be interested in having sex with a female, or every female to be interested in having sex with a male. It's just not going to happen. It's never happened all throughout our history. All since human beings have been in the world, there's never been a time where all men have had sex with females, or all females have had sex with men. And the universal truth of impermanence explains that to us. Whereas if every man or every woman was interested in having sex with the opposite gender, that would be permanence. But that doesn't exist in the world. Everything around us is constantly changing and is impermanent. So this teaching of the Buddha on sexual misconduct is helping you to be able to see how you would cause harm. And because same-gender relationships aren't causing harm, that's why he didn't include it here. You can also understand transgender individuals, that transgender individuals are completely normal. They're not doing anything wrong. They haven't done anything wrong. If you understand that the body is one thing and the mind is something different, these are two completely different things. And now when they come together, you can have a body that is of one gender, and the mind can identify with a different gender. So someone might be born into the body of a male sexual organs, but the mind can identify as female. Or someone could be born into a female body and their mind identifies as a male. This is completely normal. If you understand the universal truth of impermanence, again, you will understand that it's impossible for every body that has male sexual organs for the mind to identify as being male. And it's impossible for every female body for the mind to identify as female. This is impossible because of the universal truth of impermanence. And if you understand the cycle of rebirth, that we've all been countless beings in the past, that there could be a mind that's coming from a life where they've been a female, and now that mind is ending up in a body that has male sexual organs, but the mind is still identifying as a female because of these multiple existences in the past where they were a female. And the same thing can happen for a female body too, where the mind is coming in and having been male several times in the past, and now it's ending up in a body that is of a female sexual organs. So transgender individuals are completely normal. It's not an anomaly. This has been going on ever since the beginning of time. So if you're transgender or you know somebody who is, it's completely normal, and it can be explained through the natural laws of existence and understood based on what the Buddha actually taught. Then sometimes students ask me about masturbation. Masturbation isn't necessarily all wise, but it's not all unwise either. Sometimes people think that masturbation is immoral and that, you should never, ever, ever do masturbation. Well, it's all about what you're looking to do with masturbation, because masturbation can actually be used in ways that's helpful, but it can also be harmful as well, depending on what it is that you're actually doing. So let's just say somebody has come into the temple and they're learning these teachings, and they maybe have 5 boyfriends or 5 girlfriends or 5 or 10 different boyfriends or girlfriends. And they learn these teachings and they realize how unwise that is. And they realize that they would like to go down to just one partner. And now that they start kind of gradually moving down to one partner, they have a lot of sexual craving in their mind. And they might use some masturbation to reduce that sexual craving. This could actually be really helpful. This could be beneficial for that person because they're coming down to one partner and they're using some masturbation to help them get there. Or say somebody has an urge to go out and rape somebody and have sex against this person's consent. If they used a bit of masturbation to be able to knock down their sexual craving, this could actually be very helpful and very wholesome. It could be a wise decision to use masturbation. But also, if somebody was obsessively masturbating, where they were masturbating 5, 10, 15, 20 times a day, this could cause harm to their own mind because it's increasing their sensual desire. What this particular precept is all about is working to eliminate your craving, your desire, your attachment, your longing, your yearning. So masturbation can be used as a way to eliminate and reduce your sexual craving, but it could also increase your sexual craving as well. So you need to be able to look at that and know what you're doing. So if you were trying to eliminate a craving, desire, attachment, what you'll notice is that as you're starting to eliminate certain things, there can be some pressure built up in the mind. Like say you're trying to eliminate, say coffee, or say you're trying to eliminate sex. And as you start moving away from sex, you can feel this pressure building up in your mind. Well, just like a dam, as it's building water more and more and more, and it's building pressure in this dam, the way that they protect the dam is they open up the dam and they let the water come out. And then when the water drops back down, they close the dam. And this protects the dam so that it doesn't get damaged. Because a dam is a multi-million-dollar project. And if they were to just let the water build up and build up and build up, eventually it's going to crash through the dam and it's going to destroy the dam. So what they do is they open the dam in order to let some of the water out. And then when the pressure goes down, they close the dam again. So this is the same thing you can be doing with something like masturbation. If you're noticing that you're trying to work towards the elimination of sexual cravings, and you're noticing that the pressure is building up in the mind where you really want to have sex, but you can't have it and you're kind of agitated and annoyed, you can do a little bit of masturbation to release the pressure out of the mind. That'll drop the pressure down in the mind. And now maybe you go 1 week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks without any kind of sexual contact. But then maybe you feel the pressure build up again. And maybe you use a little bit of masturbation. And now next time you go 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks without having any agitation. And now maybe it builds up again. And maybe you need to do this again. And now maybe you go 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. And this is the way that you gradually work towards eliminating any particular craving in the mind. So masturbation can actually be helpful in certain situations, but you just need to pay attention to whether you're increasing your sensual desire or are you decreasing your sensual desire, because you'd like to decrease your sensual desire. That's what's going to get you to the peace and the joy. But again, if you're in a relationship, if you're pretty young, maybe you're thinking about having kids, you're probably going to still be having sex for the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, who knows how long. Each person decides for themselves. But if you're interested in working towards the elimination of sexual contact, you might need a bit of masturbation in the progression of actually doing that. Sex with animals, this is one of the things that's black and white. This is probably one of the only things, or there's probably others as well, like drugs and alcohol and things like this. But this one is black and white. I imagine if someone tried to have sex with an animal, it's going to result in either disease or injury or something like this, because an animal can't give us consent to have sex with it. So it would be very unwise to have sex with an animal. You might even look at any kind of pornography. If you have a pornography addiction or something like this, this is also keeping the mind in that central desire. Oftentimes, when an individual is interested in intimate contact with an individual, they might have challenges in doing that. So you might go down this path of looking at pornography. What I would encourage someone to do is instead go down the path of having contact with an actual human being and having intimate contact. Because if you've ever gone down the path of pornography, you get kind of into this fantasy world. And even you go into that fantasy world, when you try to come out of it, any kind of interaction with a human being almost doesn't feel as satisfying anymore. You can go down this path and really kind of get lost in pornography, and then it's very hard to come out of it. So it would be better to go in the direction of intimate contact with an actual person rather than going towards pornography. If you're having a situation where you are viewing pornography and you'd like to move away from it, there's ways for you to do that. There's ways for you to train your mind, and you'll see that you'll have more peace and more joy in the mind as you start eliminating those cravings that are taking you down that path. So this is something that sometimes people ask me about. And if you're going down that path, I would encourage you to look for an actual real life partner, because that's where you're going to find more satisfaction and more fulfilling experiences if you find an actual partner. So do you guys have any questions on this particular precept? Number 3? You have something? For those of you guys online, you can ask questions by putting it into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like.
I'm just wondering what your view is of, for example, in the case of two people may not be in relationships. Mm-hmm. They meet, they're attracted to one another, they choose to sleep together. Would you consider this wrong sexual conduct?
I don't think of things as right or wrong. Instead, I think about wise and unwise. At this point in my life, if I was advising somebody about a sexual relationship, I would encourage them to be sure that they have an actual relationship rather than just kind of like a one-time thing or a fling or doing something on the spur of the moment. Instead, if you develop a long-lasting, consistent, ongoing relationship, and then at some point you decide you would like to have sexual contact, that would be a wiser time to do that. It's really wise to kind of develop a healthy relationship that's not based in sex, because that's what's going to sustain you through life. In situations where you have sex very early in the relationship, sometimes the relationship just becomes all about sex and the relationship part is actually missing. And then these relationships tend to divulge and kind of disintegrate a lot easier than whereas if you have a really nice foundation of time, of spending time getting to know each other, going to the park, going to the movies, having nice dinners together, spending time caring for each other, getting to know each other's family. And then the sex can be part of your relationship, but it's just one aspect of your relationship. Sometimes in certain cultures, we're taught that the sex is like the focal point, and if you're really knocking it out in the bedroom, then you're having a really great relationship. And if you're not knocking it out in the bedroom, then you don't have a good relationship. We even call it making love, but this isn't actually the love. Having sex is, hey, I'm going to stimulate your senses and you stimulate my senses, and we get to this point where we've done that so much that we have an orgasm, and now we have all this pleasure. Well, if we think about that as the love, well, eventually this sexual activity, it's going to get kind of mundane to us, kind of having sex with the same person over and over. Sometimes it can get a little bit mundane. And if we attribute that as being the love, or that is the relationship, now when the sexual contact isn't as pleasing anymore, then we'll probably be, disgruntled and bored in the relationship, and we'll feel like the relationship has lost its luster, so to speak. So if you make sex as a later time in the relationship, you'll find that you'll have more time to be able to develop a relationship around other things like great conversations and certain hobbies and activities that you do together, and that you just enjoy being with this person and you enjoy spending time with them, and then it's not just about the sex. So if you have sex too early in a relationship, you don't have the ability to cultivate that type of relationship, and then oftentimes later in your relationship, the relationship can fall apart. So that's what I would suggest for people.
I just had another comment about the previous, when you were speaking of generosity. Mm-hmm. And I I just wanted to share an experience I had, which was I was seeing a Buddhist monk in Toronto, and just before I came to Thailand, and he offered me a calendar, and I said, I went up to pay my respects, and he offered me a calendar, and I said, no, thank you, I'm going away. And I was with my friend, and then he offered it again, and I said, no, I'm trying to eliminate things. He may have offered it even one more time, and then I didn't really think of it at the time, but I went away, and she was like, what were you doing? And so it was just an interesting kind of lesson of what you were speaking about previously, is he was trying to bless me in a way, like, take this, and I refused it. It's practically speaking, I'm not going to bring this to Thailand with me.
Well, in the teachings of the Buddha, there isn't any blessings. That's not what the Buddha actually taught. And in this situation, yes, if I was you, I would have advised you to just accept what was given. But also that monk got a lesson too, because if he asked you 3 different times to take this calendar, he was having a craving too. Because if you offer something to somebody and they say no, you just should accept what they say. That's what they've said, and it's done and over. So by him offering it to you 3 different times, he had a little bit of craving there too, or else he wouldn't have offered it to you those 3 times. So that was helpful for him as well.
I think he kind of wanted to get rid of it because he didn't want the stuff either, frankly.
Yeah, that's the want, right? That's the craving, desire, attachment. So it's done and in the past, no worries. Now you have more wisdom that when somebody offers you something, just accept it. And what you could have done is given it to somebody else, and that would have been completely fine. But in this situation, that was helpful for the monk. Maybe that monk needed that to be able to see, like, hey, don't push things on people, don't force things on people. Because monks are not enlightened, right? They're in the process of getting there. There are some monks who are enlightened, but not all of them are enlightened. So they're in the process of getting there. So these kinds of situations can be helpful for them too. So it's in the past now, but nonetheless, in the future, you know how to practice. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. I'm not seeing any other questions anywhere. So this next one, which is the 4th one, this one, the Buddha says, abandoning false speech, refraining from false speech, a truth speaker, one to be relied on, trustworthy, dependable, not a deceiver of the world. Okay, so this is usually translated as no lying, right? And that sounds like black and white, and it doesn't really give you much details of understanding. Here you can see the actual words of the Buddha are very illuminating. He's helping you not only to understand what's wise, but he's explaining to you why, right? When he says abandoning false speech, refraining from false speech, essentially what he's saying is be a truth speaker, one to be relied on, trustworthy, dependable, not a deceiver of the world. Because when you're telling lies and people discover those lies, you're not going to be dependable. You're not going to be trustworthy, and your personal, professional relationships will struggle. So he's explaining to you the why behind it. So when you're lying, this is based on the mind's craving. So this particular precept, it's helping you to protect your relationships, both personally and professionally, so you can be dependable and reliable and a truth speaker. But it's also helping you eliminate craving, desire, attachment. Because typically when someone's lying, there's a certain craving. And if they told the truth, they're not going to get what they want. And they want something. So they're lying in order to get what they want, right? So if you can be a truth speaker and just tell the truth, then you can always be reliable, you can be dependable, and you're eliminating certain cravings. But telling the truth doesn't always mean saying everything you know, right? Sometimes people ask me, they say, hey, David, what if my partner comes to me and says, hey, how do I look? Do I look beautiful? Do you like this dress? Or do you like this pair of pants or whatever it is? Well, in that situation, if you don't like it, I don't think it's wise for you to say, no, I don't like it, right? It doesn't mean that telling the truth means you tell everything that you know. What I would suggest that you do in that kind of situation is say, you know what, honey, I just enjoy spending time with you. And no matter what you wear, I enjoy our time together. Why don't we just go out and have fun? Because that person is looking for confidence. And all you need to do is kind of reassure them that, hey, I enjoy spending time with you. It's not about your clothes. Or you might say, hey, I think your smile is beautiful. I would just enjoy going out and spending time with you and your smile, right? You don't need to talk about how they look or how they appear, because if you get to the point where you have loving kindness and compassion for all beings, you should be able to see beauty in everybody, right? You shouldn't be judging other people in terms of how they look and how they appear. You can get to the point where you find everybody to be beautiful, right? You don't need to judge other people. So the Buddha understood this precept so closely that here's this other teaching that I inserted to be able to help you see how closely he actually practiced this teaching. Here, this other teaching, he's teaching his son. Sometimes people think that the Buddha left his family and he never came back, but he actually came back after 6 years. And his wife, his son, his mother, they all ordained with him. He had certain cousins and other people, brothers-in-laws that were coming to ordain with him. But here he's actually teaching his son. His son's name is Rahula. He's basically talking to his son, and he's telling his son that he doesn't even tell a joke as a lie. That even when he's telling a joke, he doesn't lie during his jokes, right? If you can imagine somebody being in a situation where they're sharing teachings that lead to enlightenment and they're telling the truth and telling the truth and telling the truth, but if he was on the side, if he was lying, people would be suspicious. When he's in the classes and he's teaching the teachings, is he lying or is he telling the truth? Because when he's over here on the side, he's lying, right? So the Buddha, he didn't even lie, even when he told a joke. And right now, that might not be what you're choosing to do. Maybe you kind of lie a little bit in your jokes. Well, if you decide to clean that up, you'll get to the point where more and more you'll be speaking the truth and people will find you to be dependable and reliable. It takes a lot more effort to tell a joke that is the truth. It has to be a much more wisdom in your mind to be able to tell a joke that is not a lie. But usually those jokes are actually a lot more funny. Right? So if you're telling jokes, it's unwise to degrade and disparage people in your jokes. It's unwise to tell lies in your jokes, but that means you're going to have to arise more wisdom in your mind to tell jokes that are funny. And one of the other reasons why I like to share this teaching is because sometimes people don't associate a Buddha as telling jokes. A Buddha tells jokes. A Buddha has fun, right? Sometimes people see these pictures of the Buddha. He's in meditation. He's looking all solemn and serious. But a Buddha has a personality, right? A Buddha has, pizzazz, has charisma, has jokes. I guarantee you they probably pick their nose, they fart, they defecate, they urinate, just like you, right? A Buddha isn't this, saintly soul that's, floating on clouds somewhere and that never tells a joke. They laugh, they have fun. That's what it means to be enlightened, that you can always have joy and have fun. So yes, a Buddha tells a joke. So it's really helpful to humanize a Buddha and understand that a Buddha is just like you and I, right? A Buddha is a human being just like you and I, but they've gotten to enlightenment on their own without the help of any teachers or any guides. And they dedicate their life to sharing their teachings with countless people. And they preserve their teachings for other people to learn them and grow, but they still tell jokes. If you were around somebody who was always solemn and always serious, would you be interested in learning from that person? No, you would like to have somebody that you can relate to and you can feel like, yeah, I can see myself being enlightened because they're fun to be around, right? So a Buddha tells jokes, okay? So this is the fourth precept where the Buddha is encouraging you to understand that telling lies is not going to lead to wholesome results in your life. And you can be able to see the truth for yourself because in situations where you've lied, you can see that it's caused harm in your life. Any questions on this one? Okay, no questions. All right. So now we've got this last one. This last one, the Buddha says, refraining from strong drink and sloth-producing drugs, substances that cause heedlessness, the basis for heedlessness. So again, whenever you're studying the teachings of the Buddha, you need to investigate them. You need to examine them. So the first thing you might ask yourself, what is heedless? Right? What is heedlessness? You probably don't use that word on a day-to-day basis. Well, I didn't use that word either, so I had to go research it. I had to go figure it out. So when I looked it up, this is what heedlessness means. It means careless, thoughtless, inattentive, uncalm, unaware, and unmindful. So whenever you're putting a substance into the body that's promoting unalertness, unawareness, unmindfulness, you're actually working in exactly the opposite direction of enlightenment. Because if you're working to get to enlightenment, you need to produce mindfulness or awareness of mind in your mind, because you need to eliminate certain unwholesome qualities and you need to cultivate certain wholesome qualities in your mind. But you wouldn't be able to do that if you were heedless or you lacked mindfulness mindfulness, if you were unattentive or unalert. So putting substances into the body is going to cause a situation where you're making all kinds of unwise decisions. This is one of the reasons why the Buddha made this the 5th precept, because if you cause the body to ingest substances that are causing heedlessness and the mind is heedless, then you're more likely to kill, you're more likely to steal, you're more likely to have sexual misconduct, and you're more likely to lie. If you go to a place where people are locked up in jail or prison and you ask them why they're there, they might say they're there for murder or robbery or something like this, or they stole something. But if you really ask them questions about why are they truly there, they will tell you it's because of substances that cause heedlessness. About 80% of them. Because they'll tell you that they would have never murdered that person if they weren't high on drugs, or they would have never robbed that bank if they didn't have an addiction to some drugs or alcohol or something like that. That they only committed those crimes that they got caught for because of the substances. So by eliminating these substances that cause heedlessness, you'll actually purify your mind more, and you'll be able to make wiser and wiser decisions in life. Where by you going down this path of substances, it's going to produce a situation in your mind where you're making all kinds of unwise decisions that are going to lead to unwholesome results in your life. So you're going to need to look at things because they're not black and white, right? Things like marijuana, it's not black and white. There's irrefutable evidence that marijuana has medical benefits, but you need to be able to look at how you're ingesting it and why you're ingesting it. There are situations where there's children who are having like 20 seizures a day, and they give them a little bit of CBD oil on their tongue, and they don't have any seizures for 6 months. So there's irrefutable evidence that this plant has medical benefits. But if you were smoking this plant and you were ingesting it into the lungs, this is actually causing harm to your lungs. Or if you were going to look for marijuana for a high, you're usually looking for a high THC. And there you know that you're looking for a high. Where if you're looking for the medical benefits of this plant, you're usually looking for a high CBD. This is the portion of the plant that produces the medical benefits. And you're probably looking to ingest it in a way that's not going to cause harm to the physical body, like maybe like an edible or an oil or something like this. But if you're looking for a high, this is where you're causing substances, or you're ingesting substances that cause heedlessness. So you're going to need to look at why is it that you might consider taking this plant. And if you're doing this for stress or anxiety or something like this, marijuana is not going to solve that. It will mute the effects of stress and anxiety, but as soon as the effects of the marijuana wear off, the stress and the anxiety is going to arise. What's causing the stress or anxiety is the craving, the desire, the attachment, what we were talking about earlier. So it's through eliminating craving, desire, attachment that's going to eliminate the stress and anxiety. The marijuana isn't going to eliminate the stress and the anxiety. It's just going to cover it up. And as soon as the effects of the marijuana are gone, that stress and anxiety is going to come through again. So this is something that you might need to look at if you're choosing to ingest that, or you're choosing to look at ingesting that. You're going to need to look at whether you're doing it for a pure medical reason, or is it for substances that cause heedlessness to promote heedlessness in the mind. We've figured out over time that cigarettes don't have any medical benefits whatsoever. But when people do smoke, we see the problems that this causes. And if you're choosing to smoke now, that might be where you're at right now. But gradually, slowly over time, you might choose to let that go because it's causing harm to your lungs and the physical body. It's also causing harm to others through secondhand smoke and things like that. So you'd like to potentially look at purging that out of your life practice, because it's just a craving that the mind has. So you'll gain more clarity and more focus as you slowly choose to let go of smoking cigarettes. You need to also be attentive to prescription medications, because prescription medications can surely help us today. And there's lots of prescriptions that will help us to sustain our life and improve the quality of our life. But there's some prescription medications that can actually be addictive. So you need to pay attention to that. If you're getting a prescription from a doctor, you might decide to research that prescription and see if it's an addictive prescription. And you might need to ask your doctor, is there another prescription that I could get besides this one? And there may be a different one available, and they could offer you something different. But there may not be something different, and it may be the only one. And in that situation, you might decide to take less of the medicine, or you might try to, get off of that medicine as soon as possible, so you're not using it for an extended period of time where the mind or the body could potentially get addicted to it. So these are things that you're going to need to look at. And then you'll even need to look at your caffeine intake. If you look at caffeine, this takes the mind up. It's a stimulant. It's a drug. It takes the mind up into this excited state, and then you'll kind of drop off. By the time you get to enlightenment, you'll have sustainable energy all throughout your day. An enlightened being, they do get sleepy where they need sleep, but they don't get tired. They don't get exhausted. As long as you have caffeine on board, it's going to take your mind up, and then it's going to drop it back off at different times. And you are hindering the mind from being able to develop natural energy where you can sustain your energy all throughout your day. So if right now you're ingesting caffeine, that's something that you're choosing to do. If you choose to gradually let that go, you might actually go through some withdrawal symptoms, much like heroin or crystal meth or cocaine, where you would go through withdrawal symptoms. You'll experience the same thing with caffeine, and just let that be a reminder to you that it is a substance. It is a stimulant. You might notice shakes. You might notice headaches. You might notice dry mouth and things like this when you're detoxing from caffeine. But once you get to the other side of that after a few days and you gradually work your way away from caffeine, you'll notice that the mind will be more clear and more bright, and you'll be able to have more awareness of mind. Whenever you're moving away from something like this, you like to do it slowly and gradually, so it's almost like the mind doesn't even recognize that it's doing it. Because I was addicted to coffee at one time, and I needed to gradually move away from it. And at first, my plan was I was going to go away from it 100%, but I realized that the mind wasn't able to do that. So I went kind of 3 or 4 or 5 days, and then I had a coffee. And then I went like a week or two, and I had a coffee. And then I went like 3 or 4 weeks, and I had a coffee. I got all the way up to 8 weeks, and I thought I had eliminated this craving. But then I ended up having more craving, and I went back and had a coffee after 8 weeks. It was like a half a cup. And finally, I threw it away because I knew I was going to get this really bad headache. I was going to get shakes. I was going to get all these issues. So as you're moving away from these kinds of things, it's very rare that you can go cold turkey and just walk away from it. You're going to need to gradually move your mind away from these kinds of things. So even something like caffeine can produce this substances that cause heedlessness. It can produce heedlessness in the mind. And if you decide to move away from it, you'll see more clarity and more brightness in the mind as a result. You even need to pay attention to things like sugar. If you take sugar in excess, it'll produce a high. So it's not that sugar is all wise or that it's all unwise. You just got to be observant to the amount and the quantity that you're ingesting, because if you take a lot of it, it can take you into a high, and then you can crash and kind of drop back off. And then some people might tell you that psychedelic substances will actually help you get to enlightenment. This isn't actually true. What psychedelic substances do is they help you, or I should say they promote in the mind the ability to be introspective, that you kind of look inward and be reflective, but it's induced by a substance. This substance taken into the body, it promotes this ability for the mind to be introspective and reflective, but it's relying on this substance to be able to do it. What you would like to be able to do is develop over time the ability for the mind to be introspective and reflective at all times in your day. Because in order to get to enlightenment, you're going to need to be introspective and reflective. And just like the caffeine is not going to let you to develop natural energy, a psychedelic substance isn't going to allow you to develop that introspection and that ability to look inward. So if you can only be introspective and reflective when you're using a psychedelic substance, that means your mind doesn't have the ability to develop that naturally. So by getting rid of any kind of psychedelic substances, you'll be able to allow the mind to develop this naturally. And then no matter what time of day it is, no matter where you are in the world, you'll be able to be introspective and reflective and look inward at the mind. And this will help you to be able to cultivate the mind and develop the mind. So these are some of the substances. I don't have everything up here. If you notice that the Buddha, he teaches in a way that's timeless. The Buddha couldn't ever have imagined that we would have invented something like PCP or LSD or some of these other synthetic drugs that we have nowadays. There's certain chemicals that we have invented that didn't even exist during the lifetime of the Buddha. So the Buddha teaches in a way that's timeless, that it applies during his life and it applies now too. That if we promote heedlessness in our mind where we're unattentive and unalert, no matter what the substance is, even if we were to eat lettuce, if it promoted heedlessness, it would be unwise to eat lettuce, right? So you can apply this teaching to any number of substances now and long into the future. If there's any substance that promotes heedlessness, the Buddha is sharing that it would be unwise to ingest that because it's going to take you in the opposite direction of developing mindfulness and cultivating the mind. So do you guys have any questions on this chapter or on this particular precept? No questions? Okay, I think we might have something here. Oh, somebody's asking online, how about tea? So there's some teas out there that don't have caffeine in them, like ginger tea, lemongrass tea, turmeric tea. Those things don't have caffeine. So, if you're going to drink those might be something that you enjoy, that you'd like to drink if you're trying to get rid of caffeine. But if you're drinking like a black tea or a green tea or something like that, those usually have caffeine in them. So you need to pay attention to those kinds of things because even the slightest amount of caffeine will affect the mind. It's just like alcohol. Like when you first drink alcohol the first time, if you've done that, you notice it affected you a lot more because your mind was more sensitive. But if you drink a lot of alcohol, eventually you need more and more of it in order to affect you. Well, when you start training your mind and the mind becomes more and more purified, even the slightest bit of caffeine will start to affect you. Like probably about a year ago, I went into a coffee shop and I was there and had some time. I was waiting to pick up my son at his school and I ordered a hot cocoa. Because I was like, I'm not going to drink any of the coffee, but I'll get a hot cocoa. And I was like, I'll have a hot cocoa. And I had the hot cocoa and I sat down and I started drinking it. In the first sip or two, I was like, whoa, it kind of jolted me, right? Where I looked online while I was sitting there and they said that cocoa has 1/8 of the amount of caffeine that a cup of coffee has. Well, I used to drink like 3, 4, 5 large iced coffees a day. But then when I started purging all of that and I had been away from that for many years, just this little sip of 1/8 of the amount of caffeine that the coffee has, it really affected me. So what you'll notice as you're training your mind's becoming more and more pure, it's going to become more sensitive to things like caffeine, even this slight amount in the cocoa. So tea is that same way, that it'll have caffeine, not as much as like a coffee or a soda or something like that, or an energy drink, but it does have caffeine in it. But you can look at other teas like lemongrass or ginger or turmeric tea and things like this if you enjoy warm drinks. That would be my suggestion for you. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions anywhere. So it's basically about 15 minutes after 12. I'm going to pause here and take a lunch break for you guys. Usually what we do is we come back at 2 o'clock on Wednesdays. So that actually gives you a little bit more than an hour and a half lunch break. Yesterday we took a little bit shorter lunch break. So that kind of gives you a little bit of extra time. I'm going to start back up at 2 o'clock. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you walking meditation. This is really good if you have an overactive mind or you have a lot of energy in your mind. So I'm going to teach it to you. It'll take me all of about 10 minutes. Maybe 15 minutes to teach it to you. And then I'm just going to have you do it where you'll actually do it. And then we'll have a discussion afterwards and see what questions you guys might have about walking meditation. So if you'd like to learn this meditation, I'm going to start at 2 o'clock. You're welcome to come back and learn that. Otherwise, have a very lovely and wonderful rest of your day. Enjoy your lunch, and perhaps we'll see you in the future. Have a lovely rest of your day. Sawadee khap, sawadee khap, sawadee khap. Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.